I switched them.
And there you are.
We're on.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Chris Scott. I'm the enterprise editor of The Sun, and I'd like to welcome you to LowellSun.com and for the second debate that The Sun is sponsoring this election season. Last week we carried a debate between Dave Nagle and Martin Burke, candidates for state rep from Lowell. Today I'd like to welcome to The Sun two candidates that are running for state senate from the 1st Middlesex district, right? 1st Middlesex district. To my right, your left, is the incumbent Eileen Donoghue. She's a Democrat from Lowell. And to my left, your right, is Jim Buba. Jim Buba is a Republican. Both these candidates faced off against each other 2 years ago, and we know what the results were. Jim is back to try it again, and Eileen is here to defend her seat. And so I've got several questions that I'd like to ask, and we'll try to let the candidates mix it up a little bit and talk to one another. So again, thank you for tuning in. I'll start with the incumbent first. Eileen, could you tell me what your top 3 goals are if you were re-elected to a second term?
Well, thank you, and thank you, Chris, and I want to thank the Lowell Sun for hosting this debate tonight. It is important, obviously, not only to democracy, but to the constituents of the 1st Middlesex District. I have had the privilege, and I will say honor, of representing the 1st Middlesex District for the past year and 3/4 or so. And I can tell you it has been, an experience that I have valued tremendously. When I campaigned for this seat 2 years ago, the top goal that I had mentioned all across the district that I heard from people, and that was my priority, had to do with jobs. That remains the same today, Chris. Our economy has come back very, very slowly. Massachusetts is in a little bit better shape than other states in the nation. But make no mistake, we're a long way from out of the woods. And jobs continues to be the issue I hear from people everywhere I go. Our kids coming out of school, will they get a job? Other people who've been in the workforce, are they going to keep their jobs? If they keep their jobs, will they be at full employment, or will they somehow be underemployed? Will they be outsourced to the extent that maybe they have a contract job but lack the benefits that are necessary? So that's my #1 priority. It's my #2 and 3, to be quite candid. But having said that, let me also add, education is a priority. And that includes education K through 12, as well as higher education, and in particular higher education, because what we do know is in order to develop and keep quality jobs, education is going to go hand in hand with that. And I'll say more about this as we go on, but having been the Senate Vice Chair of Higher Education Committee, I can tell you that it is a key to this Commonwealth's future and to stabilizing job creation and growth. And I'll give you some more ideas later on.
Mr. Buba, your top 3 goals if you're elected.
The good thing about being a Republican in this race is you can keep the same message from year to year to year because it works, it's conservative, and it's constitutional. Before I get started with any of that, I want to thank my wife. She's always haranguing me for not mentioning my wife, Cecile. I love you dearly, and I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this for everybody. Without her, we'd be nowhere. And it's a tough road. The question up is 3 goals. And there are so many of them, you can't find 3 that you really want to talk about at any one time, and we don't have a lot of time to do this. But I've been able to sum it up with the logo I'm using, which is business, balance, and back to basics. The chicken and the egg discussion regarding taxes, revenues, expenditures, and all the other bills of importance is summed up with where do you get the money. Private business, private enterprise is the secret here because it employs many more people. Without it, we're all going to be begging on the federal government for money, and we just can't do that. The balance aspect is that things that change, and they always do change, because people generally come up with a different sense of the same thing. Whether or not it works is always a matter of trial and error. So you have to be ready to stand your ground and take that step forward. Back to basics is what we're all about. We have the Constitution, the Constitution of the Commonwealth has been shredded before we even started talking about the national scene. And now we do things in a different way, some of them for expediency, because truly a 1700 idea is maybe a little old. But the concept is still the same. If the rule is good, why change it? Case in point would be housing, Section B, Section 40B. Why do we need low-income housing? And then we're fortunate that Senator Tower was able to table the clerk amendment. It gives us another year to breathe safely with respect to what it is they want to do with
Please wrap up your goals.
And I'll let you take it from there.
Okay. Mr. Buba, how do you feel about the goals listed by Eileen Donoghue? Do you feel that she has met those goals in her first term?
I'd feel a lot better if some of those goals were met. Obviously, we have a small problem with many things. It's difficult to look at Eileen now and 2 years later and remember her saying that we need to cut spending. And when the chances came to cut spending, they were voted down. We obviously had a small problem with transparency when they wanted to reach into the committee rooms and find what it is we're talking about, that backroom deal, and we got a no vote there as well. So for transparency, for cutting spending, and we'll then move down the line, and we realize that we raised taxes, and the one bill that promised to bring us something maybe someday, the casino bill, was hashed up by earmarks so that we'll never see a penny of it, not 1 penny of tax reduction for property. We have a 10% for mitigation, 2% for the arts, and a whole lot of money going into the wrong places. I just don't know what to make of any of that.
Okay, you've used some strong terminology there. Senator Donoghue, could you respond to that, please?
Well, first let me state that as far as holding the line on spending, I think we have done that in this session. In fact, we've done it in 2 different ways. One, there has been no tax increase, contrary to the allegation by my opponent, in this budget or last year's either. So in neither of the budgets that I have participated in did we increase taxes on anybody in the Commonwealth. Number 2, we also kept a commitment, one that I made when I campaigned, and that is to restore funding to local government. It is without question that local government was absolutely decimated during the recession. The cuts made to local aid and to Chapter 70 monies were extraordinary. Local communities had to absorb those cuts. They still have not been brought back to where they were pre-recession. But I am proud of our record in the legislature and proud to be a member of this legislature where we were able to increase local aid last year, increase local aid this year, increase Chapter 70 last year, and increase Chapter 70 money for schools this year without raising a dime in taxes. As far as transparency, I supported the reform legislation, reforming state government, that not only increases transparency for the first time in the history of the Commonwealth, but also provides a lot more accountability, performance-based measures, making sure that each agency has to account, not just on an annual basis, but quarterly, so we can measure not only the projected revenues, but the expenses and how we're going as the year goes on. In the past, those assessments were made long after the horse could have left the barn. That legislation, which was championed by Senate President Terry Murray, one that I supported and many of my colleagues supported, I think went a long way and will go a long way to increasing transparency in state government, just to address a couple of the matters raised by my opponent.
I'd like you to address one comment by Mr. Buba about the legislation that led to gambling being approved in Massachusetts for the first time. I think you said that was hashed out in back rooms and that the taxpayer would never see any revenue from that. Is that correct?
Not necessarily in those words. What I meant was the $450 million projected was hashed up as though it was direct revenue. So we're looking forward to a time when we have 3 running casinos and all the money's already gone.
Eileen?
Well, again, I don't know that I fully understand the allegation, but let me say I sat on the committee that held the hearings, again, in this session, that was the precursor of the legislation expanding gaming in Massachusetts to pass. It was an open and transparent process. We held a hearing for several hours in the Gardner Auditorium. We heard from proponents and opponents of the legislation. Ultimately, it passed. The revenues that were projected are conservative revenues. The 3 licenses, up to and no more than 3 licenses, a great deal of time and effort went in to make sure that the revenues will be realized by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and by the taxpayers, not just from the initial licensing fees that may be referred to, but moreover, the tax revenues that will be generated from these enterprises. One of the things that was important to me, having chaired the Committee on Tourism, Arts, and Cultural Development, was to make sure that there were a number of concerns addressed so that a casino cannot come in and decimate our current existing entertainment venues. Those included making sure that the seat requirement in any entertainment venue was going to be of an amount that was not going to be in direct competition with, for instance, our Lowell Memorial Auditorium right here. Making sure that the casino operators had to work in collaboration with the theaters in Massachusetts so that they could not take business and money from the pockets of these theaters that work so hard. And also to have a remediation fund that will fund any damages and hopefully level the playing field. And it's something that we as legislators know will probably have to be tweaked as we go along. But make no mistake, we took that into consideration as well as a number of others, and I know my time is running out. But the legislation was complex, it was well thought out, it was well discussed. And whether people were for it or against it, I would suggest that it is something that will benefit the Commonwealth of Massachusetts because of the depth and detail that went into crafting the legislation.
Just a quick follow-up to you, Mr. Buba. If you had been in the Senate, would you have voted to support gambling?
No, actually no. Casino gambling is a last resort, and what we've done with casino gambling is set it up on the altar as though it's going to be our saving grace when it is not. The legislature prior to my opponent's tenure has decimated, if anything, the payouts on the one lottery that we have. And by lowering the payout percentage, they have also realized a decrease in sales. So the revenue stream, the gravy train, if you would, is over. Most of our Chapter 70 money is tied to the lottery revenues. And because of declining sales, the change from 75 to 60 to 62 to 57, et cetera, going down the ladder, so that we retain more of the lottery revenues for operating expenses and other things we don't know about, has been lost, causing us to now consider casino gambling. And then we have casinos going to come up and do battle directly with the charity bingo plus lottery ticket sales. So it's a net loss all the way around.
I'd like to change the topic here to the district itself. The district is diverse in that it includes Lowell, which is one of the busiest, one of the largest urban areas in the state, and then the district also includes some very small towns that don't share the same needs and wants as Lowell. As the challenger, if you were elected, how would you best balance the needs of Lowell, which are very specific, and which can really run in stark contrast to the needs of some of the smaller towns out in the western end of the district? I'll give you a couple of minutes, and then, Senator, you can respond to that as well.
The district is what it is, starting in the city of Lowell and going out to Dunstable and Pepperell. We literally have cows to concrete for considerations. Everything that we do has got to work in some sense to fit. It's the northern tier of the most populous county, well, to note that. So we have a lot of people that live here, and for different reasons. The people move to Dunstable, Pepperell, and Groton to get away from the hubbub that is Lowell, Springfield, Worcester, and Boston. And they commute gladly. 35 years ago, when you could commute for less than $1 a gallon, that wasn't a problem. Now we have another problem that we created for ourselves.
And that problem?
Transportation costs. The answer is to spend bazillion more dollars for high-speed rail in some locations. This is the California solution. So now we can go faster to nowhere, but it doesn't resolve the issue. The bottom line, and my opponent's very first statement, was jobs. We have factories downtown here that are being renovated into low-income housing. Where are the people going to work? And if it costs them a ton of money to get from here to there, what's the point of working anywhere at all? And I think that analogy is resolved because most people prefer just to not work at all and collect what they can doing nothing.
Okay, Eileen, could you talk about the diversity of the district?
The first Middlesex district goes from urban, with Lowell being the 4th largest city in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, to suburban, to rural in many respects. And it's a remarkable example of the diversity of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I had the privilege of representing the city of Lowell for 12 years. I came to know it very well in the needs of Lowell in a number of ways, whether it had to do with economic development. I think one of the things we were able to do here in Lowell, working in concert with state government and federal government, is to reuse what had been abandoned, derelict properties, to bring them online to be tax-paying entities that have benefited the city. We have also paid close attention to and brought efforts in collaboration with projects such as the Hamilton Canal District that we see already not only will provide housing but jobs and reuse for space that again in the past would have been just nothing but a derelict abandoned 16 acres that nobody in the right mind would have ventured into. I've been able to use the tools and the experience that I've gained here in Lowell to go across the district to work with the communities for what they need in many regards. And so, for instance, whether it's planning for a fire station, trying to help work and utilize what are the best programs available in state government so that each town can be its unique self. One of the things that I admire the most about the 1st Middlesex District is that each town is unique and different, and they have their own vision for how they want their town to be run and to be preserved. And as their state senator, it's my job to make sure that I assist them in that endeavor, using whatever experience and tools that state government can bring to the table. We've been able to do that in a number of occasions, and there's a lot more to be done. We recently cut the ribbon on the Tingsboro Bridge. That's going to bring a lot of relief for the people who have suffered for years in terms of transportation and getting from one side of their town to the other. It's simple matters like that, but complex in the solution. Each town has their own plan, and we've been able to assist them. And again, I will point out that I've been able to work in concert with Representative Sheila Harrington, a Republican who represents 3 of the towns that I represent. And we've been able to work together, and I think maybe set a good example for some of the folks down in Washington who aren't able to work
together. I'm going to cut you off on that one. Let's just talk about the campaign a little bit. Mr. Buba, what do you do when you get your name out into some of the western parts of the district, the far-flung reaches of the district? And what type of campaign are you running? Are you standing on street corners and the like?
It's a little bit of all the above. And we've also looked into the technology aspects of trying to use this fine equipment to spread the message a little bit differently. Some of the old things don't work as well, and some of the new things don't work well with some of us senior people. So we have a problem in transition, moving through technological advances. It's been a tough nut.
Are you actively out there raising money?
No, I don't think raising money and raising tons of money for a state senate, state representative race is most important. It is to some people. They want to go out and hire someone, and they end up with 6- and 7-figure debts at the end of their term, and it becomes a problem. Married or chained to somebody else's beast. It's just not right.
So are you running a campaign, really just a bare bones campaign? You're not actively raising money?
I wouldn't call it bare bones. The people I talk to are very supportive and very, very helpful. When they offer money, I give them a list of things that I would like to buy, things that we could do, things that we could plan together. And we've got some interesting things that we want to do. And not all of them are geared towards becoming elected. But, my most effective pin here is to be an opponent to this incumbent. We can put her on trial if necessary each and every cycle and make sure that the people's business is being handled. That's the most important part of it. The reason I ran in 2010 was because nobody else on my side of the aisle was standing up going, whoa, I want to be state senator too.
Right.
Well, maybe I don't want to be state senator so much, but nobody else is running, so let me give it a shot, and I did.
Could you elaborate on your phrase to put the incumbent on trial?
Every single election cycle is an incumbent running against a prospective candidate. Each of us have great ideas. Each of us has a direction that we'd like to steer the Commonwealth, the district, the state, the nation. And every single time you get a chance to stand up and say no, even if you don't mean it, it's the best way possible, because you'll get them thinking, and somebody will say something, and sooner or later, even in chambers when it's closed doors, back room, they'll think twice about making a deal. And that's what we want to stop. That's the message.
Senator, your response?
Well, let me just say that having represented the 1st Middlesex District, I can tell you I'm well aware that the voters can hire me or fire me every 2 years. It's the voters who are going to make the decision. And I take that responsibility very, very seriously, the responsibility they've given me to represent them down on Beacon Hill. You know, one of the things that is important, and elections are important. They are about choices. They are about what direction you want your representative to take. Are you responsive to the people? I submit that, you know, I have been responsive to those who've contacted me and asked me to further their cause. If they've had an issue, be it big or small, it doesn't matter. That's what you do in an elected position, and you work for the people who elected you. And that's the primary responsibility. In my short tenure on Beacon Hill, I can tell you I've worked, as I said, hand in hand with Democrats, with Republicans. There have been no backroom deals. Really and truly, we have, in this session, passed more legislation of greater magnitude and meaning, I think, than in many sessions for a great long time. We mentioned expanded gaming, but there have been a lot of important pieces of legislation that this legislature passed these past 2 years.
Name for me the 2 most important pieces of legislation you think were passed during the most recent cycle. Mr. Buba, you could respond to that.
You know, I think one of the most important ones, and it was one that I co-sponsored with Senator Tarr and others when I first was elected in January of 2011, and had to do at that point with the parole reform. You know, we had seen the tragedy of a police officer in Woburn being gunned down by somebody who had been out on parole after having been a multiple serious offender. And the parole board had just let him go off and sail off, and only to reoffend, and in this case, to take the life of a police officer working. I co-sponsored legislation with Senator Tarr and others. As I said, it was a bipartisan legislation that ultimately became part of the crime bill that we passed just a few months ago. That bill is really important because it is critical that people are safe in their homes, safe in the streets. And without getting into detail, let me also, that's one that's of personal importance. There's so many others, but another one that was important, and this goes to putting money in the hands of local towns and cities, and that was municipal health care reform. That was a very hard-fought, difficult vote, but one that had to be taken. You know, cities and towns had been facing escalating costs for health care beyond what private sectors were. They needed to be given the tools to make changes to their health care plan design and not have to collectively bargain if necessary. It was a way, and in this sense, it was a way of giving communities the option, saying to their unions, either we sit down and we come up with a more reasonable, affordable health care that taxpayers can afford, or otherwise we can take this off the table for collective bargaining for good. The option was there. The decision was on a local community by community basis. It wasn't a one-size-fits-all situation. In the case of the city of Lowell, they chose to go into the GIC, the State Health Care Fund. They're going to realize savings between $7 and $9 million a year. Those are real dollars that are being saved right now in this fiscal year. They could not have done it without the legislation. In the case of other communities I represent, the GIC wasn't the route that they were going to go, but they were able to negotiate savings because of that. And those are just 2 examples of what I think is important legislation.
I think it's a great idea that we had some action on the GIC portion of the bill, but anything that's been saved and not included in next year's budget certainly will find its way in. And that's just Massachusetts. That's the way it always goes. If any savings at all, it's not going to be long lived. We take seriously Melissa's bill. We also take seriously that you should note that it came into the legislature as a request. You call it parole reform. I'd like to think of it more in terms of we need judicial reform, since the bench is most of our problem for making decisions. Steadfastly stuck in the past. I don't like it. But Melissa's bill, as it's now called and signed, has been in the legislature for the last 8 years actively, 12 years in committee before that. So when we're talking about backroom deals, we're talking about people listening to good sense, good law, and a way to change what we have and turned it into this mess that's taken us 20 years out. And that does not limit it to the parole board or the bench, because we go to the Tingsboro Bridge, and that's been 18 years in Wishing before it even started. Colleen, Gary, and Drake makes a good point with that. When she was first elected in '94, it was a battle that she started to fight. I doubt seriously she did much more than help pave the way for the money that went through the legislature. I didn't see her out there studying the lead paint on the beams, but the bridge needed to be repaired, and the reason it was in such disrepair was because the legislature prior to you and me was spent on everything else. And when they run out of money, they've taken it from the lottery. They rigged the public funds, just went nuts. Property taxes, and you know this because you sat in the council and voted for a 2.5% starting mark for every budget you ever passed, just in the city, most of it for schools. And our return on our investment is near zero. We're spending more and getting less.
Okay. 30-second response?
Well, you know, I'm proud of my record of serving the city of Lowell. I think we accomplished a great deal during the time that I represented, together with others, the city of Lowell. We were able to leverage state investment, federal investment, private investment in order to push the city forward. I'd submit that the city of Lowell is one of the best conditioned gateway cities in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. There are very, very few cities that can hold a candle to all that has happened here, and that will continue to happen here in the city of Lowell. I, together with my colleagues in the House, the Lowell delegation, Representatives Golden, Nangle, and Murphy, were delighted to announce today that the judicial complex will be moving forward. There's a commitment from the Patrick administration to put this into design phase, a key part of the next development, which is going to not only bring relief for the dilapidated courthouses that have been neglected over the years. When built, it will be a $175 million investment by the Commonwealth, one that not only will serve the judicial purposes, but also will leverage private investment. And I'd submit, whether it's the Hamilton Canal District or even the contemplated office buildings at the Freudenberg lot, as well as the what was the National Park Service lot that President Obama signed over and was transferred to the city of Lowell just, I believe, last week. So,
I mean, if that was canceled today, because of the
but there are a lot of very good things happening. It's not the work of one. It's not the work of me alone or anybody alone, but it really has been a partnership. Public and private partnership, working together, trying to get it right, trying to improve the quality of life for everybody we represent. I'm proud of the record of what we've been able to achieve, and by no means do I suggest it's been perfect. Never is. But you have to keep working and keep trying, and that's something that we've been able to do in Lowell. We don't give up.
Mr. Buba, do you agree with the Senator's comments about Lowell being respected across the Commonwealth as one of the best run, a city that understands how to get things done?
For reasons unknown, Lowell is perhaps one of the better run municipal facilities. That's not saying much when you consider you have to take the fourth largest city. You can't get out of its own way. It has to give up much in the way of taxes lost to the Hamilton Canal deals. Can't say that come out of the price of purchase for any of the arrangements. But now we have a courthouse. We needed a 3- and 4-star world-class hotel. We have public housing instead of a larger university complex, right where it belongs, downtown. We have a very nice light rail system, which is a tourist attraction, that should have been expanded years ago into a light rail transportation system so that we can get people in and out of the city without having to suffer with the planned parking. So we're going to, everywhere you move, you have to decide how it is you want to proceed. Light rail makes sense in Lowell, makes sense in Springfield, makes sense in Worcester, just like it did in Boston.
Are you aware that there is a proposal to expand the trolley system across the city?
$65 million to make it reach Hamilton Canal is not my idea of an expansion. We need to get to the train station, and we need to get to the university. And with so much emphasis for the co-chair of the Higher Education Commission, I would think that that would have been the first thing on their mind. But back in '78, when I was working in the '90s at the university, and I went through the old plans and the proposals for the University of Lowell, if you remember that, before it became UMass. And they had proposed a water taxi. I don't recommend a water taxi down the canals to reach what is now being built in the Northern Canal region.
But are you a proponent of an expansion of the trolley system, or aren't you?
I am, but certainly not just to the courthouse.
Okay. Senator?
You know, I'm very familiar with the proposed trolley expansion. It's one that Congresswoman Tsongas has obtained money, $3 million or so for the planning stages. It's building on the existing system. There will be 7 miles of track that will go from the Gallagher intermodal transportation system through the city and out to the campus of UMass Lowell. It is anticipated that some of the carrying and operating costs will be absorbed by virtue of the university replacing their now shuttle buses with the trolley transport for students. It's one that will be in its completion and in the final stages, one that will run on most of the hours of the day, save for those in the middle of the night. It will be regularly run. These are things that we know from the studies have to be. So the $65 million price tag does take it from Gallagher intermodal all the way out to the campus and through the downtown. And then the operating costs are the next phase that we've been studying, and those we expect to be a joint venture.
And do you think that's a good idea? Or is that too expensive?
Oh, I'm all for it, but I'm going to caution everyone at all. With the big dig in mind, $65 million is the starting fee. And by the time we get done with it for reasons outside of our control, and then some of them within our span of control, that cost will more than quadruple.
Okay, I'd like to come back to public transportation and infrastructure programs in just a second, but you've hit on affordable housing a couple times and public housing downtown. And I'm not sure what your message is there. Could you tell our viewers and our readers what is your view of low-income housing and how it's interspersed in the downtown? You know, a big part of the downtown is still subsidized. About, I think, maybe 50% of the downtown is subsidized. So could you talk about that a little bit and your view on that?
Public housing, low-income housing. You know, this goes right hand in hand with so much of what we want. If we want the city of Lowell to look like a dilapidated mill town, just like the city of Salem where I was raised, and the city of Lynn, and the city of Revere, and the city of Saugus, all of those places are stuck in the mud because of the handcuffs placed on them by historical commissions. That you have to leave it like the way it is, and that's why we have chimneys that nobody uses.
Okay, let's
and we're going to take a mill building that will produce an income and a business for them, yet we can't get out of our own way to convert it into low-income housing.
Okay, that sounds like that's a different issue, though.
It's not. They're all
related. Do you think
they are all seriously
there's too
related.
much low-income housing? Is that what you're saying?
I would think yes,
Okay.
especially when you come down to where we have plots at the end of the golf course and people said, no, we don't want you to build $1 million homes. Well, $1 million homes that sell are paying $1 million taxes by value. And if you don't, you end up with a mill building that's converted to 40B, and if it's 40B and they don't sell, then who's picking up the tab? Well, wait a minute, we are. We'll pay the property tax because it's not lost, so we have to pay more, and then we're paying the rent. Well, it's a federal program, and I saw that when the senator mentioned the state and federal loans, but state loans is tax money, and our interest money returned, and federal money is more tax money that comes out of my other tax pocket. I'm looking for the private investors.
Okay. Senator, the comments on low-income?
Yeah, you know, when one of the things when I was on the council, we did when we created the Artist Overlay District was to bring more market rate housing into the downtown. At that point, it was about 80% of the downtown residences were subsidized housing, most of it elderly housing, and as far as residences. We've been pretty successful as far as bringing market rate housing into the downtown. That was critical. It not only increased the tax base for the city of Lowell, but it also provided people in and about the downtown that had disposable income to support shops and restaurants and all other attractions. You know, we've now had somewhere between 1,300 and 1,500 units that have been created in the downtown that didn't exist before we created that district. As far as 40B, you know, the city of Lowell has 40B kicks in part when a community has not reached 10% of the state mandate for affordable housing, and so it gives developers a way of going around zoning and local laws in order to circumvent that, so that they can say, look, we'll make a portion of our project 40B affordable housing. make no mistake, they're making a big profit, and it's been a problem for some of the towns. That's never been an issue for Lowell because we've already far exceeded the 10% requirement. In fact, I think Lowell is somewhere around 13 or 14% of our housing stock being affordable. So it's not something that developers can utilize or have advantage to here in the city of Lowell. It's an issue as far as other communities. But I think we've done a pretty good job of trying to balance and mix housing in terms of socio and economic. And one example of that was the Julian Steel project that was very, very controversial back in the day. And that was tearing down a public housing project, one of the few in the whole country that we tore down. Why? Because the state had not been putting the investment in it over the years. A full quarter of the units had been condemned. You went through them, and it was just outrageous the way, you know, and by the way, Julian Steel was never meant to be permanent housing for families. It was supposed to be temporary housing for servicemen coming back from World War II. And it was a state housing project that was not kept up.
Yeah, I'm going to cut you off there. So I assume that was a good idea in your view, the demolition of Julian D. Steel and trying to assimilate the folks who live there into neighborhoods across the city?
Most of what we have wrong today started out as a good idea at one time. Public housing availability for returning veterans was most important. We don't dispute that. We can't go back and change it post-war.
But the question was, do you
But I was one of the returning group from the post-Vietnam era, not that I served there. And we didn't have that advantage. All of that was taken away from us. Now we have what we call gateway cities.
Okay, but Julian D. Steel, do you think that was, as the senator mentioned, that was an accomplishment of the city and the state delegation? Do you
That
feel
was centuries ago, and you have to remember what she did say that was most important is that the maintenance funds and the allocations to maintain those units was neglected, which is code for spent someplace else. And therefore it wasn't maintained, and therefore we had to tear them down. Not to say that they were the greatest looking things in the world, but you've got a house, people can live in it. And if it's a place to live, what more do people need?
May I respond?
Yes, absolutely.
Actually, it wasn't a simple solution. You know, there were advocates and those who vehemently opposed tearing down that housing project.
Oh, went to court.
It went to court, I think, more than once, and it was a very, very controversial project. The whole idea behind it was not just to provide, you know, a livable, you know, community for families to raise their kids in, one that wasn't crime-ridden and below standard, substandard housing, but also to give people the chance to own a home. And that was one of the goals, and continues to be a goal of this project. Unfortunately for the project, Julian Steel was torn down. The state did not have to continue to subsidize this inferior substandard housing. And then, of course, the real estate market kind of went into a tailspin during those years. But nonetheless, out of the 180 units that were planned and are planned at River's Edge now out in that site, 98 have been completed. 98 are owned by people who would never have owned and never did own a home before. You know, it's remarkable. I was just out there recently because those homeowners have experienced very little in terms of foreclosure activity. Think about it. During a period of time when many, many people have seen their homes foreclosed, it has skyrocketed, and it's been a huge problem for our communities. River's Edge remains one that people, working class families, own their own home. They take great pride in it. They have kept their homes up. They're a lovely community, nothing like what was there before. And we've had remarkably few problems in terms of that. It is a commitment that we continue to have. I, together with my colleagues in the House delegation, were able to secure funding to continue to the next phase for infrastructure, road improvements, a MassWorks grant that was awarded so that the developers, which is a private or nonprofit developer, it's not the state building these houses, can continue on to the next phase, which is another 34 homes that will be built there and sold. So it's a success story. It's one that takes a lot of time and patience and hard work, and really people volunteering their time. I want to give credit to Diane Silva from Enterprise Bank, who has headed up Residents First, who has made a remarkable
I'd like to just
project.
Just to move on to a few
Sorry,
other
you gotta stop me
as
because I'll just keep
time
talking.
is moving quickly. You stood on the Tingsboro Bridge about a week or two ago to recognize the the rebuilding of the original bridge out there. That obviously is a highlight, but if you go across the state, roads and bridges are in terrible condition. We've talked about that. Well, how can this, and I'm going to limit you to 1 minute, how can the state do a better job maintaining its roads and bridges? And you'll get a minute as well.
Well, you know, it's been in this recession deferred maintenance, deferred improvements that have happened. One of the things that we have seen is, you know, the federal government allegedly will be bringing forward a transportation bond bill of great magnitude, recognizing the deteriorating and crumbling infrastructure that we have here. The state as well, we expect in January to be bringing forth this administration. Governor Patrick will be bringing forth a transportation bond bill. That's one way. That's one way of funding these projects that need the state highways and byways that need to be done. We increased Chapter 70 monies in this budget to cities and towns. That's something that Chapter 70 monies are monies that the state gives to cities and towns to work on city sidewalks and city roadways. That was increased, and it was one that I know every single community I represent was starving for those dollars, but we got them to them.
Jim, you talked about this a little bit earlier about state roads and bridges.
We have been discussing infrastructure depletion problems in this state for the past 70 years. Every time we build a road or a bridge, it requires maintenance. The legislature and the cities and towns recognize that. So they'll get the money from wherever. Most of the time it comes in the form of grants. When everybody's working, nobody really cares because there's plenty of money coming around in the form of revenue. We feel that pinch today because of the recession, which is likely to continue for the next 4 to 7 years, one way or the other. But to recall that we are doing things now differently in the Tingsboro Bridge or something to Herald, it took 18 years to find the money, and then we're going to sell more bonds. The state's got a GDP running around $400 billion annually. We spend over $76 billion annually, and our revenues have retreated to $44 billion. So we're still spending more on debt service and pensions.
Okay, very good. I'd like to ask you guys about the ballot questions. Mr. Buba, how will you vote on the medical marijuana question and on the assisted suicide question?
One or the other or both?
Both. You have 1 minute.
No on both. Medical marijuana is a very nice idea, and I'm sure there's something that's missing to me is a standard. This is where government could have done some good work. But of course we know what happened to the state-run labs. There is no standard for what is an overdose of THC. And therefore, you want me to look into consider releasing this as a medical marijuana issue that has been touted in California, Washington, Colorado, proposed in the state of Maine. And I can't agree with it. Because to me, if it's a controlled substance, it should be controlled, and therefore it should be a doctor's prescription.
Move on to assisted suicide.
And assisted suicide is just that there's no way in the world you could possibly want to approve that. There are horror stories of people showing up in wheelchairs with IV bottles, talking about not permitting.
Okay, thank you, sir. Senator?
I don't support either one. You know, regarding medical marijuana, it's a problem. If you look at the ballot question as drawn, there's a real problem in terms of, how it will be regulated and so forth. We have seen, and by the way, having said that, I have complete empathy for those who are suffering from, the effects of cancer or other type of debilitating illnesses. But as proposed, it is far too loose, far too broad. There's not ample opportunity to regulate either the dispensing or growing or all of those things that are pretty loosey-goosey in this proposed ballot question. All we have to do is look at California's experience, and this isn't far from that, and it's been a nightmare out there.
And just talk about assisted suicide for 10 seconds.
I don't support the assisted suicide. Again, I think it is a very difficult thing to say you have 6 months or less, and even with a medical doctor certifying that. I completely support, end-of-life care and palliative care and all of those things that the medical profession has done and does provide. But at the present time, as proposed, I don't support either ballot.
Well, you guys both agree on that. Here's an opportunity, Mr. Hoover. You can ask the senator any question you'd like.
Any question I would like. Melissa's bill is passed, and that's not of our doing. We have no tax relief. We're not going to get any because we're far in the hole. We don't have any jobs because the jobs that are coming in and out are going to be taxed out of existence under the current federal reform. And in the middle of all that, we passed a state health care reform bill that showed up on your desk at the podium on the 31st of July, the last day of the session. No one in there read that bill on either house, and yet it passed. How do we explain that? We now have another bill that nobody read but everybody loves.
Senator?
Well, I think, let me just say that, again, the crime bill and what Melissa's bill is a good bill that passed through Massachusetts. We have held the line on taxes for 2 years in a row. There have been no increase. We are actively growing jobs in Massachusetts. Is it enough for what we need and want? No, but it is. We are in better shape than many states across this Commonwealth. The jobs bill that passed in other respects has recognized, and we've seen right here, the Job Commission report that was released just the other day. Community colleges are going to be key for retraining and retooling the workforce. Right now, we have jobs, we have employers who are out there saying, I need this type of worker, but I need them to be specially trained. They have to work hand in hand with the community colleges. The jobs bill did that, and also the reform of community college. There's more money for jobs training now. We're doing a lot on the jobs front, and I believe we'll be successful as we go forward.
Do you have a question for Mr. Buba?
Mr. Buba, you have advocated that we have, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that there should be cuts made in terms of the state budget, that we're spending too much money. If I could ask you to tell me how much you think should be cut from the current $32.5 billion budget, and where would you make those cuts?
Oh, no, that's not really a loaded question, because if you start off by cutting everything that is not, then you'll find that you have things that are very important. Part of my argument to you in 2010 was that we needed to prioritize, not privatize, as Mr. Campanini to prioritize our expenses. Certain things are more important. Everything is indelibly important to all of us in some way. And we have a special interest in certain things. In this case, we have St. Joe's Hospital, which was closed. Saints, which was sold. Yeah, we have this dire need for health and medical care. And the bottom of that argument will resoundingly prove state by state that the solution is summed up in 2 words: for profit. So if you want me to cut stuff at the state, and I do, because I seem to think that there's an awful lot of things going on that we shouldn't be paying for.
Why don't you name a few of those things? And that might answer her question.
Free health care to illegal immigrants, if you want to call them immigrants to be polite. The alien population has expanded. She used the word gateway cities. Lawrence is a gateway city, and it's bankrupt. It's in receivership. You cannot sustain that large expenditure with this small income. If everybody had a job working at the textile mills, we'd have tax money. We could complain about spending tax money, but we'd have it to spend. Now we're taking money from people that don't have it. So when you vote no to increase the ceiling for circuit breaker breaks for taxes on seniors, the senior citizens are the ones that are going to take the brunt of that, having to constantly pay. When we talk rents, and you say federal and state money, it's always tax money. And if I'm paying all these taxes, so maybe if I try to mitigate my spending with what it is I have in revenue, therefore balance, things would work out better. We can complain over coffee.
I'll give you one more opportunity. Do you have any? I don't feel it was a loaded question. She was asking you specifically where you would cut the budget because you feel Beacon Hill spends too much money. So do you have a few areas where you cut that budget?
Yeah,
Can you identify?
I'd start with the arts. We don't need the type of wild support for a business concern that's making its own money. This is sort of like an NPR analogy.
Okay.
There's tons of money being made there, and if they're not making it, then all of
Was you cutting funding for Big Board?
Well, yeah, he's already got, I think I'm going to ask him for a loan. He's got tons of money to give away.
Okay. Well, cutting the arts, I think I would draw a response from the senator
If I could
as
just
chairman of
briefly
the Arts
respond,
Arts and
as
Tourism Committee.
my role as chair. Tourism, arts, and culture is the 3rd largest industry in Massachusetts. It's a $15 billion a 30-year industry. It supports 124, almost 125,000 jobs, and it returns in tax revenue to state and local government over $1 billion a year. So it's not fluff. It's not, you know, just frivolous. Let's fund to play. They're real jobs, real dollars, and it's a real industry. In the creative economy that we are in here today, it is a way of driving more dollars into the state coffers. On the arts and cultural front, the investment that the state makes in arts and culture through the Mass Cultural Council, for every $1 that the state has invested, they get 5 back in tax dollars. Now, any business person, even I would suggest former Governor Romney, would think that's a good business plan. If you invest $1 and you get $5 back, I think it's a great.
I've heard that analogy before, and I've heard that again with a dollar paid in healthcare and in food stamps turns $1.50 in returns. Yet I don't understand
about that.
And that just came out of the Lowell Sun. You'll have to do some research on that. It was a number touted by one of her colleagues. If we spend $1 and get 5 back, why don't we spend 10 times that amount and not have to pay taxes ever again?
Well, I think, you know, to answer that question, that certainly there are people who would advocate to invest more because it is turning a profit to the state and returning tax dollars. However, there are other needs, things like education, things like, you know, roads and bridges, things like public safety, things like, you know, making sure our seniors are taken care of, things like taking care of, you know, the health care needs of the state employees and state government. Maybe you don't agree with it, but...
Well, you're talking 500% return, so my point is if you throw in 10 times or 100 times what we're spending now, wherever it comes from, we should be the richest people in the world. They'll come to us for loans.
But the problem is when you do budgets, and this is the issue, as you go through and analyze the budget, there are so many wants and needs, and you have to balance. Though you may want to say, just like in your own household budget, gee, this is a winning stock. Let me take my whole paycheck and put it in this stock and hope it brings in a whole bunch of return. You can't, because you have to pay your food and your mortgage and your lights and your electricity. State government is very, very similar. You have to make sure that you're balancing the needs, the day-to-day needs and operation of government and those who you are there to serve. At the same time, you have to operate in what I would suggest is a smart way, so that when we do put money into certain endeavors, if it's returning money, that's a smart investment. And I think the balance...
Do you disagree with that, Mr. Buba?
I'm still asking, why don't we spend 10 times the money and get $5 back for every one we put in, and then we'll be the richest people in the world. The same analogy was put out towards food stamps program when it was recently argued. And I think the closing line was, for every $1 we spend in food stamps, we realize $1.50 in return in 10 years. So the new secret word here is in 10 years. In 10 years, we're going to spread out this big sum of money. $5 trillion in 10 years is $500 billion a year. But still, we have a $400 billion GDP. That is not all tax, and that's what's at the bottom of this. There's a difference here in values.
Okay, I'm going to cut you off there. We have 5 minutes left, and I'd like to give each of you a 2-minute opportunity to make a closing statement. We'll start with the incumbent ladies first.
Thank you. Well, thank you, and again, I want to thank you, Mr. Scott, thank Mr. Buba, and thank the Lowell Sun, and thank the viewers and the readers of the Lowell Sun and everybody who has taken the time to pay attention to this race and to this debate in that regard. You know, having served in the state legislature for now a little more than a year and a half, I can tell you that the issues that we face here in the 1st Middlesex District are serious. They are important. There isn't a community that I represent that doesn't have the wants and needs that for them to make sure that state government is operating at its fullest potential. That's something that I have been proud to serve this district on Beacon Hill, bring the message down to Beacon Hill that we need to return monies to our communities. It's a promise I made when I first campaigned 2 years ago, bringing monies back to cities and towns, and that I believe I've been able to keep that promise and will continue to advocate for them. Making sure that jobs, that we're doing everything to create jobs here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And one key component to that is providing the necessary support to higher education, as well as through our K through 12 education system in Massachusetts. We have to be the best, not just good, we have to be the best. But having said that, the other area of concern that we need to address our attention to is making sure that our families, that our kids can afford a quality education. And that's something I am going to commit myself to on a go forward if I am lucky enough to gain your support again. Honestly, I think what we have here in Massachusetts is not only a great state to live and to work and to raise your family,
10 seconds.
but it's a great state that together we can make sure that we push the forward so that we do have the necessary revenues to provide the quality of life that everybody in each community I represent deserves.
Thank you.
With all due respect, I ask for your vote on November 6th.
Mr. Buba, you have 2 minutes, maybe a few more seconds.
I want to thank Mr.
You're
Scott,
welcome.
my opponent, for appearing and making this possible. It's not easy to hold people over the grill when you need to ask certain questions and get certain answers. We have other questions that these little nitnoid or small aberrations in every operation. We can't be certain where it's going to take us, so we'll take it one day at a time. We have nagging questions about Sheriff DePaula, who, for all intents and purposes, committed suicide to escape something. We'll never know what that is. We have Mr. Barranco, who stole $10 million on top of his $500,000 salary, something that the state auditor could be more diligent with making sure it doesn't happen. We have roads and bridges that are suffering because we're spending money that's allocated for maintenance on a constant basis for other things. We want to know why a sex offender like Marzilli is getting a state pension. We want to know why Mr. Bulger is getting a state pension to begin with. And we want to support higher education, but we haven't even talked about the endowments that they have. And then we're going to give public money on top of the private money so that they get it twice. That's the Big Bird problem. Big Bird is worth billions, and we don't get any of that back. So the return on our investment is wrong. I'm running for the state senate because I want to get a hold of these budgetary concerns, and I'll arm wrestle with the governor and the rest of the colleagues that will sit in chambers. And if it gets by me, then by gum, it's the best deal we got. But as far as Middlesex, 1 of 40, I'll get everything that we need, and I won't come back without it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank you for tuning in tonight. Again, this is Chris Stout. I'm one of the editors here at The Sun. Tomorrow night, we'll be out at Devon's for a debate between Nikki Songus, the incumbent running for the third Congressional District, and her Republican challenger, John Bolnick. And then we'll be back here on Thursday night for a debate between state rep candidates from Westford, incumbent Jim Arciero and his challenger, Valerie Warmel, who is a member of that community's Board of Selectmen. So I hope you tune in, and thank you for tuning in, and have a good night.
Keep the name to it.